In 1998, England's star player David Beckham lashed out at an Argentinian captain, Diego Simeone, and was given a red card. It was a critical moment in the World Cup match, and a handful of fanatics never forgave him. The vilification reached a low point when an effigy of Beckham, wearing his England shirt, was left hanging from a noose on scaffolding poles in South London for thousands to see. In recent days, attention has focused afresh on the reaction of a minority of football fans to English defeat in a major footballing tournament. But unlike 20 years ago, much of the conversation has been this time around race. In Manchester, where Beckham spent some of his best playing years, a mural of Marcus Rashford has been defaced with insulting language. Unpleasant, but not messages that could be definitively ascribed to race hate, and not by any measure as inflammatory as the hoisting of an effigy onto a scaffold. Try to imagine, if you can, the outcry that would have happened if a mannequin, say, of Rashford, and you begin to see that though serious questions arrive from the online abuse of black England players, there are aspects of this story which are, first and foremost, rooted in the overreaction of some pretty unhinged fans. Well, what's happening online is, however, a different story. But here, too, there is an argument raging about ultimately who's responsible and how representative, or otherwise, they are of a deeper problem. This afternoon, the boss of MI5 dismissed claims that Russian bots were responsible, or at least partly responsible, for racial insults hurled online at Rashford and fellow England players Jadon Sancho and Bukayo Saka. But is the online abuse the tip of the iceberg, or a mountain being made from a molehill? Here with his spade is Andrew Doyle to ponder on this one. Andrew, welcome.
Hello.
Complicated, sensitive territory, it goes without saying.
Hugely. And I think with something as emotional as this, it's really important to be absolutely rooted in the data that we've got. So I've got the data here that we have. So as we know, a few days ago, Gareth Southgate was saying that a lot of the abuse was coming from abroad, and the Premier League's own data has backed this up. They're saying that 70% of the abuse is not from the UK. And then we have the Centre for Countering Digital Hate. Now, they've picked up on 106 Instagram accounts which are racially abusing the players, and BBC Newsnight were then able to locate 5 of those from within the UK, 59 from outside the UK. So it's not all the accounts, but it's quite clear that there's a trend here, that at least it's fair to say that most of the racist tweets are coming from abroad. We don't have any specific data from the final itself, but we do have a very interesting and rigorous analysis from a group called Hope Not Hate. Hope Not Hate are a campaign group, and they looked at the 3 group stage matches and assessed the kind of abuse that the players were getting. They looked at 585,000 posts which tagged in the players or included the players' names, and they came up with the following, which is that 2,114 were abusive in nature, that's 0.36%. And 44 were explicitly racist, so that works out at 0.0075%. So the first thing to say about this is that 44 racist tweets is 44 tweets too many, right? So what this shows us is that there are racists out there. Racism is a problem in society. We need to stand up against it. You can't call yourself a civilised society if you tolerate racism. What these stats also show us is a more positive thing, which is that racists are still very much on the fringes of society, and that we do live in a society. I mean, look at the universal condemnation of these racist posts and tweets. We live in a society where to be openly racist makes you a pariah, and rightly so. So, you know, so there's this sort of good news and bad news here, and that's not at all to suggest we shouldn't be acknowledging this. I mean, the problem with when you raise data like this is people will say you're denying racism. Actually, you know, I'm doing the reverse here. I'm saying it's there, we've got evidence of it, but let's tackle it. And the way to tackle it is to be honest about the extent of it. Now, what's been very, very interesting here is, although the data is quite clear that it's a marginal thing, commentators over the past few days have been suggesting that this is evidence that racism is endemic in UK society, that it's sort of built into the structure of UK society. And this is in the face of all the data that we have. Now, all the survey after survey has revealed that the UK is one of the most tolerant countries in the world. If we let's take one example, the discrimination in the European Union survey, which was conducted by the EU in 2019. This is one of the most comprehensive public opinion surveys ever conducted. And this revealed that the UK was, in fact, one of the least racist societies on earth. So we have to now ask the question, why are so many people promoting the view that we live in a systemically racist country?
I know what you're going to say, but the viewer doesn't. Go on.
No, well, I'm going to suggest that it is in the interest of certain people to promote that view. And what worries me about that is when you do so, what you're in fact doing is amplifying the minority of racists that do exist in the country, the people that we should be tackling, and you're promoting them. And what you're saying is that they have far more support and far more influence than they deserve. In other words, what this kind of narrative does is it works as kind of PR for the very worst people in society. I find that really a problem, because if we want to actually deal with the problem of racism, and it is a problem, is we have to be objective, we have to be able to look calmly, analyse the scope of the problem, identify the perpetrators, and not make the mistake of thinking that Twitter is the same as real life.
Yeah. I get this, what economists call producer interest. You know, this might be some of the NGOs and charities who derive a livelihood and a mission from combating racism. And I can see why it might be in their interest not to focus on your number of 0.0075% of all tweets sent were actually racist.
That's not my number, that's Hope Not Hate.
Hope Not Hate.
Yeah.
It was one of those NGOs, but from a slightly different position.
Yeah, yeah.
It's another thing entirely for mainstream media outlets to whip up this moral panic,
yes,
if that's what I'm right in saying.
Yes.
And dispense with any sense of proportionality.
That's exactly the problem. I mean, we are all coming from the same position here, is that, and the very fact that everyone has the consensus that racism is appalling and we need to tackle it, means that this kind of argument about, or this promotion of this idea that it is sort of embedded in society and that we're all complicit, that's really, really, really unhelpful. And we've just had the Runnymede Trust produce a report that flat out...
It's my job to introduce the next item.
Oh, sorry, were you going to do that?
No, go on, you've done it now.
Oh, well, I don't mean to steal your thunder. But the Runnymede Trust has said that basically England is systemically racist, and this is a response to the government's Commission on Race and Ethnic Disparities. You'll remember this was a couple of months ago. It was led by Dr. Tony Sewell.
Yeah, and, one of the members, Mercy Moroki, who's a presenter on this news channel.
Absolutely, and Mercy as well. And the report found that there is very scant evidence of systemic racism within the country. It wasn't saying, as many of its critics claimed, that racism doesn't exist in England or racism is over. Quite the opposite. The report was saying racism does exist and we need to be honest about the scope in order to tackle it successfully. Now, what the Runnymede Trust have done is they've produced this report that just flatly contradicts this commission without evidence. Now, I've looked through the report, I've read most of the report, and again, we keep hitting these assertions. As a total assertion. Let me give you an example of this. So this is just one example. So from the report, they say, we are concerned that the underrepresentation of BME groups in journalism will feed into inaccurate reporting about minority groups. Well, you might say, OK, that's an interesting proposition. So let's see. I would expect an example or some examples of how this has happened. There's a footnote. This takes you to a Guardian article that simply repeats the same assertion. Wow. So it'd be the equivalent of me just pointing to someone else and saying, well, he says the same as me.
Feedback loop of data.
Yeah, it's a kind of sort of idea laundering. Yeah, it's really quite astonishing how shoddy this report is. And again you face this thing that it claims that inequalities of outcome, any inequalities at all, of outcome in terms of race, is evidence of systemic racism. This is one of the core tenets of critical race theory. And although the authors of the report don't use the phrase critical race theory, they are absolutely informed by it, in the same way that BBC Newsnight, when they were analysing this, made the same claims. They talked about disparities of outcome in CEOs and various sort of positions and jobs, and they said this is evidence of systemic racism. Actually, it's not. And as the Commission for Race and Ethnic Disparities was trying to point out, you need a multivariate analysis. There are all sorts of reasons why there are, and to reduce it to race actually makes it harder to combat the problem. One of the most explicit examples of this would be education. The report pointed out that, for instance, black Caribbean pupils underperform overall, and that white pupils tend to do better than them. However, black pupils from an African background outperform white pupils. So if you're going to make the claim that the education system is systemically racist, it's a very targeted kind of racism, isn't it? Because what it's doing is it's giving a leg up to black peoples if they're from Africa and pushing them down if they're black peoples from the Caribbean. So clearly, race is not a systemically racist system. There are other things going on. And as the original commission tried to make clear, there are things such as cultural norms, geographical inequalities, trends in family structure, all sorts of things. Poverty, for instance. You know, first-generation migrants tend to have lower resources.
Not having a dad around.
Culture. All sorts of things like this, exactly. And whereas the Runnymede's approach is to say, well, poverty in itself, the fact that more ethnic minority people are in poverty, is evidence of systemic racism. The Commission for Race and Disparities was trying to make the point that actually it's the other way around, that's actually one of the multivariate factors that you have to take into account. So it's very complicated, and I suppose what I'm saying... Sorry, go on.
Well, no, it is complicated, of course it is, and you tell it very well and very faithfully and very precisely. There are elements of this story, though, however, which are utterly predictable. I think I could have predicted some of this before the match was played. I could also predict, and I find this worse in a sense, that when you make repeated requests to the Runnymede Trust to come on and talk to you on your Free Nation show, they seem disinclined to accept your invitation. It's a shame, but it's so achingly predictable.
I think I would love to happen is to be able to talk to someone and ask someone from the Runnymede Trust to defend this position. And I know we've put a bid in and haven't heard anything back. But I think it's really important that we are able to discuss these assertions, because if you're going to make the assertion of systemic racism, that should be taken seriously, right? There are plenty of examples where a racist system historically has led to disparities today. If you take the segregation by race of housing in the US, which still has an impact on people today, right? Yeah. So that's a good example.
You know how I feel about us talking about America all the time. It really ain't. It isn't our culture.
We're applying critical race theory ideas to a culture where it doesn't make any sense. And so I think we do need to talk about it. And I think it's very interesting that you mentioned that there might be a partisan interest here, because the Runnymede Trust produced a report in 2000 where they actually said, no, the idea of an inherently racist country is not true. And something has happened over the past 20 years to suggest that they've changed their mind on that. And they're going to make these assertions, and they're going to be evidence-light. And actually, I would say the Commission had it right, which is that we need evidence-led discussion of these difficult, sensitive issues, precisely because we all agree that racism is an appalling thing that we need to eliminate.
Remind us when your show is at the weekend.
It's at 4 p.m. on Saturday, so hopefully we'll have someone from the Runnymede Trust and we'll see what happens.
Wouldn't that be grand? Andrew Doyle, thanks a lot.
Welcome to the GB News YouTube channel. You can watch us live 24 hours a day, catch up on your favourite shows and join in the conversation in the comments below.
Don't forget to subscribe and you'll never miss any of our exclusive content.